What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved and mild-mannered stars sits down for what should be a routine promotional interview, only to find himself caught in a verbal crossfire with daytime television's most notorious host? The legendary Kevin Costner, known for his gentleman demeanor and iconic roles in classics like Dances with Wolves, walked onto the set expecting to discuss his latest project, but instead found himself facing off against Behar's aggressive tactics that pushed the Academy Award winner to his absolute breaking point. What started as typical Hollywood promotional banter quickly spiraled into a fiery confrontation that had audience members gasping and fellow co-hosts scrambling to contain the situation. The tension became so unbearable that Costner did something unprecedented in his decades-long career, something that left millions of viewers in complete shock. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this explosive showdown will leave you questioning how far daytime television has gone. You're about to witness one of the most shocking and heartbreaking moments in daytime television history. Kevin Costner, America's cinematic sweetheart whose gentle demeanor and iconic performances have made him one of Hollywood's most beloved figures, was about to face something that would shatter his legendary composure. The Academy Award-winning actor and director who has spent decades charming audiences with his natural warmth and authentic performances, who has always approached interviews with the kind of gracious professionalism that made him a global treasure, was about to encounter a host who seemed determined to destroy everything that made him special. For over 4 decades, Kevin Costner has been the embodiment of Hollywood's golden age values. He's navigated countless interviews with his characteristic charm, handled difficult questions with thoughtful grace, and always maintained the kind of gentleman's dignity that has made him universally beloved. From Field of Dreams to Dances with Wolves, from The Bodyguard to Yellowstone, Costner has crafted a legacy built on storytelling that celebrates the best of the American spirit. But on this particular morning at the View studio, Hollywood's most beloved leading man would face a different kind of challenge entirely. This wasn't going to be about his latest Western project, his incredible journey from unknown actor to Oscar-winning director, or his passion for authentic American storytelling. This was going to be a calculated assault on his values, his legacy, and his very right to tell the stories he loves. What you're about to see isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly beloved figures can be torn down when someone decides that attacking American icons makes for compelling television. The man who gave us some of cinema's most heartfelt moments, who has always represented the best of Hollywood's storytelling tradition, was about to show a side of himself that even his most devoted fans had never witnessed before. The View studio was about to become the battleground where America's cinematic sweetheart would be forced to defend everything he stands for. The warm morning sunlight streamed through the corridors of ABC's Manhattan studios as Kevin Costner arrived with his characteristic gentle charm and natural warmth. The beloved actor moved through the backstage area with that unmistakable grace that had made him America's cinematic sweetheart, greeting every crew member he encountered with genuine interest and the kind of heartfelt professionalism that had defined his 4-decade career. "Good morning, folks," he said with that distinctive voice that had narrated some of cinema's most memorable moments, stopping to compliment a sound technician on his vintage baseball cap. "Is that from the '85 World Series? What season that was?" His eyes lit up with authentic enthusiasm as they discussed the game, showcasing the genuine curiosity about people that had made him so beloved. His publicist walked alongside him, clipboard in hand, reviewing the standard promotional talking points about his latest Western project. "Kevin, they're thrilled to have you on. Just focus on the new film. Maybe share some stories about working with the cast. And you know how much audiences love hearing about your passion for these stories." Costner nodded with that trademark smile that had melted hearts for generations. "Always a pleasure to talk about the work," he replied with characteristic humility. "These Western stories, they're part of our DNA as Americans. There's always something new to discover in them." The makeup artist couldn't help but beam as she applied final touches to his already handsome features. "Mr. Costner, you look exactly the same as you did in Field of Dreams. How do you do it?" "Clean living and good stories," he laughed, his natural charm filling the room with warmth. The studio erupted in enthusiastic, almost loving applause as Costner made his entrance. His presence immediately filled the space with that special quality that had made him a global icon, a combination of strength and gentleness that felt like coming home. The hosts practically glowed with excitement at having such a treasured guest, and everything felt perfectly aligned for another classic Kevin Costner promotional appearance. But Joy Behar sat quietly observing, her expression suggesting she had something far more destructive planned for America's beloved leading man. "So, Kevin," Whoopi began with obvious delight, "tell us about this new Western project. You've always had such a gift for bringing these stories to life. What drew you to this particular tale?" Costner's weathered face lit up with that genuine enthusiasm that had captivated audiences for decades. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice carrying the passion that had made him one of cinema's most compelling storytellers. "Whoopi, it's a story about redemption, about people finding their way in a changing world," he said with that distinctive warmth. "The American West has always fascinated me because it represents this moment when anything was possible, when people could reinvent themselves and chase their dreams against impossible odds." The audience hung on every word, clearly enchanted by his natural storytelling ability and authentic love for his craft. His hands moved with measured gestures as he painted a picture of the characters and their journey. "And working with this cast reminded me why I fell in love with filmmaking," he continued, his eyes sparkling with genuine appreciation. "When you get actors who understand the heart of these stories, who respect the history we're trying to honor, that's when the magic happens." Throughout this warm exchange, Joy Behar had remained conspicuously silent, while the other hosts leaned in with obvious admiration, nodding and smiling at Costner's passionate descriptions. Joy sat back with a calculating expression, studying him with an intensity that seemed oddly predatory for such a heartfelt conversation. Finally, after several minutes of enthusiastic storytelling, Joy shifted forward in her chair. The movement was subtle, but it immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Costner paused, his instincts picking up on the shift, and the other host grew noticeably quieter. "Kevin," Joy said, her voice carrying a coolness that contrasted sharply with the warm energy that had filled the studio moments before, "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me. These Western films, these stories you love so much, don't you think they're kind of outdated? I mean, some people are saying they represent values and attitudes that don't really belong in modern entertainment." The studio temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and Costner's genuine smile faltered for the first time since he'd sat down. Costner's legendary warmth dimmed as he processed Joy's calculated attack on the genre that had defined much of his career. His natural charm remained, but there was a new wariness in his eyes as he tried to understand where this unexpected hostility was coming from. "Joy, I think you might be misunderstanding what these stories represent," he replied carefully, his voice still carrying that trademark gentleness, but with a confused edge underneath. "Westerns aren't about promoting outdated values. They're about exploring the human condition, about people facing challenges and making difficult choices in extraordinary circumstances." Joy sensed she had found her opening and pressed forward with the predatory instinct of someone who had identified a vulnerable target. Her voice took on a sharper, more aggressive tone as she leaned into what was clearly becoming an interrogation rather than an interview. "But Kevin, let's be honest here," she continued, her words dripping with condescension. "Your Western films romanticize a period of American history that was built on violence, displacement of native peoples, and toxic masculinity. Don't you think that's problematic messaging for modern audiences, especially young viewers who look up to you?" The other hosts exchanged deeply uncomfortable glances, clearly sensing that Joy was venturing into territory that went far beyond respectful discussion of his artistic choices. Sarah attempted a nervous smile, but Joy's focus remained laser-locked on Costner. Costner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his legendary politeness being tested in a way that was clearly unprecedented in his media experience. "Those stories acknowledge the complexity of that era," he said, his voice carrying the first hint of disappointment. They don't glorify violence. They examine the cost of it. They don't ignore the suffering of native peoples. They try to honor their perspective. The studio audience could feel the tension building as the warm promotional atmosphere rapidly dissolved into something much more combative and personal. Joy's predatory smile suggested she was just getting started with her systematic deconstruction of America's beloved leading man. Joy's eyes gleamed with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction as she prepared to launch her most devastating attack yet. The pretense of discussing Costner's filmmaking had been completely abandoned, and everyone in the studio could sense that something far more personal and vicious was about to unfold. "Kevin, let's talk about what really concerns me," Joy said, her voice taking on a tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Your whole approach to storytelling, your conservative worldview, your traditional American values, don't you think they're completely out of step with where this country needs to go? Don't you think clinging to these outdated perspectives is actually harmful to progress?" The question hit the studio like a physical blow. The other hosts' faces showed immediate shock, and even the camera operators seemed to freeze. This was the kind of ideological attack that crossed every professional boundary, weaponizing Costner's personal beliefs and artistic vision against him in the most confrontational way possible. Costner's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The gentle warmth vanished, replaced by something much more intense and protective. His voice, when he spoke, carried a tremor of genuine anger that suggested Joy had just attacked something sacred to him. "Joy, you're not questioning my films anymore. You're attacking my character, my beliefs, my love for this country," he said, his voice steady but filled with barely contained emotion. "These aren't outdated perspectives. These are timeless values about honor, sacrifice, and doing what's right even when it's difficult." But Joy had clearly decided that respect for his beliefs was irrelevant to good television. She leaned forward even more aggressively, her voice rising with what seemed like manufactured righteous indignation. "When you have the platform you have, when you're influencing millions of people with stories that celebrate these traditional masculine ideals and simplistic views of American history, don't you have a responsibility to evolve? Isn't holding on to these outdated worldviews actually a form of cultural harm?" The studio audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what felt less like journalism and more like a public trial of America's cinematic sweetheart. What happened next would become one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Joy's attack on Costner's values and love of country had pushed America's cinematic sweetheart past every boundary of professional courtesy, and the protective passion that had fueled his greatest performances was about to transform into something far more fierce and uncontrolled. "Joy, what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's cultural vandalism," Costner fired back, his voice rising with an intensity that shocked everyone in the studio. "You're taking stories that celebrate the best of the human spirit, that honors sacrifice and courage, and you're twisting them into something ugly because they don't fit your narrow worldview." Joy's face flushed with anger as she shot up from her chair, clearly relishing the explosive confrontation she had successfully orchestrated. "Cultural vandalism? Kevin, I'm asking you to take responsibility for the impact of your work. When you keep making films that glorify these outdated masculine ideals, you're holding back progress." Costner rose to meet her challenge, his presence filling the studio with an authority that was both magnetic and intimidating. "You want to talk about holding back progress? You're attacking the very stories that built this country, that celebrate the courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things." The other hosts were completely paralyzed, afraid to intervene in what had become an all-out war between a television host and Hollywood royalty. The studio audience watched in horrified fascination as the confrontation escalated beyond anything they had ever witnessed. "Your films represent everything wrong with traditional Hollywood," Joy shot back, her voice cracking with what seemed like genuine conviction. "Maybe it's time for your kind of storytelling to die." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would become the most uncomfortable and personally devastating exchange in The View's history. The silence that followed Joy's devastating comment about his storytelling needing to die felt like it stretched on forever. Costner stood there, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, his legendary gentility hanging by the thinnest of threads. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that unmistakable intensity that had made him a global icon. "Joy, you just revealed everything about who you are," he said, his words cutting through the studio like a blade. "You don't want evolution or progress. You want destruction. You want to tear down everything that's ever inspired people, everything that's ever given them hope, because it doesn't match your poisonous worldview." Joy realized she had pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she made one final, desperate attack. "Kevin, I'm just saying that maybe it's time for Hollywood to move beyond these simplistic narratives that don't reflect modern reality." Modern reality? Costner's voice exploded through the studio with a force that made everyone flinch. "You think stories about courage, sacrifice, and doing what's right are simplistic? You think honoring the people who built this country is outdated? That's not modern thinking. That's cultural suicide." He began removing his microphone with swift, controlled movements, each action a clear statement that this conversation was over. Joy watched in growing panic as she realized her attack had backfired spectacularly. "You can't just walk away when someone challenges your worldview," she called out desperately, her voice rising to almost a shriek. Costner turned to face her one final time, and the look in his eyes was one of complete disgust mixed with profound disappointment. "I'm not walking away from a challenge. I'm walking away from someone who has confused destruction with progress." With that, Kevin Costner left the set with the same dignity he had brought to every role, every interview, and every moment of his legendary career, leaving Joy standing alone in the wreckage of what had once been a respectful television studio. The silence that engulfed the View studio after Kevin Costner's dignified exit was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. It was the kind of profound, uncomfortable quiet that follows the destruction of something beloved, when everyone present realizes they've just witnessed an unnecessary assault on one of America's most treasured figures. The only sound were the mechanical hum of cameras still rolling and the shocked whispers of audience members who couldn't believe what had just been done to their cinematic sweetheart. Joy stood frozen in place, her face cycling through expressions of defiance, confusion, and something that might have been the dawning realization of what she had just destroyed. When she finally spoke, her voice lacked its earlier aggression, replaced by something that sounded almost desperate. "Well," she said, attempting to regain control of the narrative, "I think that reaction proves exactly what I was talking about. Some people can't handle having their outdated worldviews challenged." But the other hosts' faces told a completely different story. Whoopi looked genuinely disturbed, her expression suggesting she couldn't believe what had just happened to a man who was essentially Hollywood royalty. Sarah appeared close to tears, and even Sunny seemed shaken by the unprecedented disrespect they had just witnessed. The studio audience sat in stunned disbelief, many shaking their heads in obvious disgust at what had transpired. Several audience members could be heard whispering, "That was completely wrong, and how could she do that to him?" Their voices carrying clearly in the unnaturally quiet studio. The production crew stood frozen, knowing they had just captured something that would be remembered as one of the most unnecessarily cruel moments in television history. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was the moment when basic respect for beloved figures was sacrificed for ideological warfare. What you just witnessed wasn't progress or necessary dialogue. It was the systematic destruction of America's cinematic sweetheart, and Kevin Costner's departure from that studio wasn't just an exit. It was a defense of everything good about American storytelling that will be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. And that's how America's cinematic sweetheart went from beloved guest to defender of traditional values in less than 20 minutes. All because Joy Behar decided that destroying Kevin Costner's artistic legacy was more important than respecting one of Hollywood's most treasured figures. Costner's departure from that studio wasn't just a walkout. It was a gentleman's stand against the cultural vandalism disguised as progress. The question is, do you think Joy was justified in challenging Costner's storytelling values? Or did she cross the line into attacking America's beloved leading man? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more shocking moments that expose the dark side of modern media. Until next time, remember, some stories and values are worth defending, no matter the cost.